know we can make those recommendations. I think they need to trace. So, okay.
I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's 2 o'clock. Thanks for everyone for being here today. We've got a lot on the agenda, so we'll go ahead and get started. First thing we want to do is any additions to the current agenda that you see before you from anyone? Okay. Approval of previous minutes. Can we get somebody to approve? Okay.
I second.
Second. All right. Thank you. Any board member comments? Nope. No board member comments. Okay. Management comments. Tom, you want to go first?
Regarding the vote, regarding quorum, we're at 49.9% of the vote that has been cast so far. We have to get to 50% for it to be to reach quorum. So I'm hoping that we'll hit that the next day or so. But definitely we reached quorum because of the volunteers that made all the calls. We had 300 volunteers make 17,200 calls. So a great volunteer effort. Regarding the lakes, you know, we're still working on the issue of the dog park and the damage that was caused by the flooding that came off of Loch Lomond. We definitely know that we'll have to relocate at least the small section of the dog park because the stream takes a hard right, and those trees that were partially protecting the small dog park and the ball field are now gone. And so when we had that secondary flood, it was very evident that losing those trees is really going to impact that area. We're going to have to relocate that dog park. We have a budget meeting tomorrow for the community at 6 p.m. at Reardon Hall. And going back to votes next week on Tuesday at Reardon Hall, the election committee will reveal the outcome of the vote. And that was it.
John, I'll turn it over to you. No comments? Rick?
Our trout program for this fall was delayed by a week because of high water last week. We didn't want to inadvertently stock Lake Ann. We stocked Brittany for a little sugar down the line. But we are going to receive trout later this week. So by this weekend, we will that program will be off and going. Flood updates. The Stony Kirk ramp was washed out for the 4th time this year. It is being repaired. London Landing, we are very aware of repairs that need to be made there and some dredging that needs to happen. Tanyard Creek received some damage to the restoration project, about $19,000 worth of damages. We don't have a time frame of when we're going to address that at this time. The Lake Ann drawdown began on Monday. For what good that was right at the beginning. I think we're to the point now where we're making a little progress against what's naturally coming into the lake. And we still feel like we can be on schedule for the December 5th getting it all the way down. It should, unless we have another big rain event. Our fish sampling continues. We're working on Lake Ann this week with some netting, trying to get that done before the lake is down too far to use the ramp. And our blue catfish remain in the Gulf ponds despite the amount of flooding we've had.
Any idea how many are still there?
No idea, really. It's hard to say because they've stopped feeding. It's gotten so cold, they're not coming up to the surface like they were. So until we get nets in there in February, we really won't know.
So from a budget perspective, with all the flooding that we've had this year, what is your estimated, what is the cost from a lakes and parks perspective? Like how how much damage did we sustain? Because every event, it seems like there's several $1,000s that we spend. Do you have a tally on what that costs for the year?
So as far as dredging and that kind of thing,
Yeah, just
and
any kind of damage done from
damages to the like to the Stony Kirk ramp, that even though we've had 4 washouts, that's all something that we've been able to do in-house, putting it back. So the load of gravel here and there that it's taken, that cost has been fairly minimal. That doesn't address the long-term fix for that problem, and it's kind of a complicated fix because we get a lot of water infiltration that goes under that parking lot and then it comes up. And I've been told, not an expert, but I've been told that the likelihood of that, if we ever paved it, for the pavement to just completely peel off is pretty high in that area. So right now it's just we're just going at it with the Band-Aid approach.
Okay. All right. I'd like to move on now to John. I think he's got a presentation and a video he wants to show us.
Testing?
So first off, thank you guys for allowing us to do this. This was kind of fun for us. We don't normally get to do this sort of thing. Most of our work is with fish and of that sort. So we're reading papers that have to do with things not fish related. So applying science to this is fun for us. Secondly, well, I guess I should say where we left off last time. We were kind of tasked with coming up with some good hard numbers that we could sort of look at and get some video for everyone to see. We came up with a lot of ideas. You guys came up with ideas out in the audience. I know we came up with several. And in the end, we were kind of faced with the reality, the time crunch we were going to be under, having our operators that own those boats, they're going to be winterizing. Of course, we had to make it before this meeting, and then also just at any given time from like mid-October to about December, our weather can turn really nasty here in northwest Arkansas, and nobody's going to want to be out on the water at that point. So we really kind of focused in, got some really relevant data points, and that's what we kind of went with. So I'll start in with our presentation. Well, you were right. Might have to advance the slides. So what we did was we wanted to kind of eliminate some of the environmental variables that we're used to working with fish. 2 things that we can really be sure of is that the weather's never going to cooperate, the environment's not going to cooperate, and if you work with live animals like we do with fish, they definitely will not cooperate. So we tried to eliminate some of those variables. So our wake boat passes are all parallel to shore or near parallel to shore, as near as a good operator is going to be able to get unassisted by GPS. We measured wave crest height, which actually varies or is different from wave height, and that is defined as the distance from average lake level to the wave peak. And this was measured right up as close as we could get the shoreline to the nearest inch. Our runs were recorded at 150 feet from shore and 200 feet from shore. Of course, 150 feet is our current regulation. 200 gives us an extra buffer, and I think we've discussed that is the new standard recommended by the industry. And then we went with 2 speeds because we wanted to illustrate the 2 activities that we know that these boats do on the lake. The first one is the wakeboarding activity that usually occurs, or at least with this boat, it occurred at 21 miles per hour was optimal. And wake surfing, and that is that activity where we saw the guy let go of the rope and you're actually surfing the wave.
Marvin?
Hey, Matt, can you move the microphone? I'm getting a little bad echo.
All right, give that a try.
Test.
Words are better.
So wake surfing, where the person that's doing that activity is actually going to let go of the rope. They're surfing the wave that's coming out from behind the rope. That optimally occurred with this boat at 10 miles per hour. Also, for our wake surfing simulation runs, we applied a manual wedge that was applied to the starboard side of the hull. And I'll go into more detail about that wedge when I start talking about the boat. Distance was measured with a Sig Sauer Kilo 2200 LRH rangefinder. The stated precision for that unit is plus or minus 1 yard, so well under a total foot. And the way we actually measured that distance was we shot the seawall that was right there in that measuring area. The seawall was relatively flat. It gives us a nice hard return surface for that laser, if you guys are familiar with how a rangefinder works. So we shot a common area and then worked back from there. And then when we actually found our distance, we would drop a rather large marker buoy, and that gave our wake boat operator a good target to shoot for to get as close to it as possible without actually running over it. For this particular experiment, our watercraft in question was a 2003 Malibu Wakesetter VLX. It had a hull length of 21 feet, a beam of 8 feet. And now back to that manual wedge we were talking about. It was a Mission Boat Gear Delta Wake Surf Shaper. Say that 3 times fast. Again, it was applied to the starboard side of the hull. As you guys can probably imagine with any device like this, it's going to be out near the stern and at or underneath the water level of the operating watercraft. With this particular type of wedge, and there are many different types as I soon found out, and they use a lot of industry terms, but with this specific wedge, what happens is it's going to generate some lift on the side of the craft where it's placed. So you can imagine, just like an airplane wing, it's going to lift up that side of the craft, watercraft, and then it's going to push the opposite side of the boat deeper into the lake, presumably giving you a much larger wake from that side of the craft. And then lastly, to really try to get maximum wake, we had a second passenger that was on that wake boat that rode on the non-wedge side, the large wake side of the stern, and they were riding as far back in the watercraft as possible and on that side to try and give us a really targeted additional 200 pounds of ballast right where that wake was going to come from. And then for all of our runs, there was 1,500 pounds of ballast water on board.
That's a lot.
So here was our study site. We didn't quite get in mid-lake. We were just looking for a good workable surface for us to set up a lot of equipment. You guys, there's a zoomed in, there's a zoomed in view. The little pink lines, so these aren't actually representative of where those runs, the line that those runs would have taken place on. It just gives you an idea of where 150 feet is, 200 feet is. But that was the area we picked out. It's a nice average piece of shoreline, gave us a good working surface, good area to shoot video from.
Another question.
Yeah, Mark.
Did they estimate how big the wake behind the boat was?
No.
They just measured the wake at the shoreline only.
That's what I thought. Do they have an estimate of how large the wake was behind the boat?
They only measured it to the shoreline. They didn't put any other mechanism out to measure wake.
I understand that, but did they visually look at it and estimate?
No, we didn't try to give any estimation to it. We wanted to actually be able to measure and not rely on our eyes, so to speak.
The only science we have on that is what that study done by the WSIA that we've shared multiple times. It does have information about wave heights with a similar boat.
Right, and I actually looked at several studies that were done pretty similar to ours. They weren't using the same distances or the same boat sizes, but if you plotted our data on a curve and attempted to make a model from all those different models, or from all those different numbers, you would see our data lines up pretty well, so we could probably get somewhat close. If I had all of those studies' hard data, we might be able to give a good estimation of how much extinction we had as we got towards the bank. But I guess the top point there is the data matched up, so we might be able to get at that, but we did not specifically measure it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So we'll go into the video now, but I want you guys to notice as we're kind of going along that you're going to see a lot of splash, and it'll be in places that aren't necessarily where I was standing. It's going to be most notable on run number 5. If you look south on the aerial, you'll see beyond where I'm standing, there's splash that's not necessarily in the study site, and that looks like it's all dependent, as we probably would have guessed. It's dependent on the angle of the way the wave hits that particular shoreline, or the angle of the shoreline meets the wave as it's coming in.
There is no audio to this.
So this was a beautiful day on Lake Windsor. The relevant data point there is we got a west-northwest wind given to us by the Weather Service of 9 miles per hour. It was pretty variable. As you guys that live on the lake know, what you get from the Weather Service may not be necessarily what you're going to get. That is me down in the water. Our measuring device is right in front of me, and there's another camera in between myself and the measuring pole. So the small lines are 1-inch increments. The large lines are 1 foot marks. These first few runs are at that 21 mile per hour wakeboarding activity that we were talking about. And there you can see our marker buoys. That first one is 150 feet. Second one out there is 200 feet. So this next run, run number 4, is going to be the last of that 21 mile per hour wakeboarding. On run number 5, we shift to that 10 mile per hour wake surfing activity. So now notice up in that area what you'll see in the next few seconds. There's the splash as it meets, whereas we don't necessarily see that down here. Right.
Which side shore? Does that mean that the larger wave is set?
Wherever the wedge is at, the large wave is going to be on the opposite side.
Okay.
I think that was our maximum height.
This is run number 7. This is our last of the 150-foot runs. Yes. So I'll give you guys a minute to kind of digest this, but that's the the relevant data points that we collected. Big take-home points here are at that 150-foot mark. We were able to generate a 9-inch wave peak crest. We've got a lot of 5s and 6s in there. The low for the day was 4 inches. And I'll come back to this slide whenever we're at the end, so you guys can, as you're wanting to ask questions or what have you, you can kind of use that as a viewing point. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the owners and operators of that test boat. They did everything that they could do for us to generate wake. Thank you to the property owners that allowed us to use their property to set up that equipment and monitor equipment from their property. Thanks to Lakes committee members that were out there volunteering with us. And then lastly, thank you to our marketing department for the video editing, the expertise, coming out on a Saturday, and loaning us all that equipment. And with that, that is it.
So if you had to summarize what you saw out there, and I'm trying to get a distance between the 100-foot versus the 200-foot industry, say 200 feet should be the new standard. It looks like you get less result. You have smaller peaks with the 200-foot. Can you summarize? Is there an aha thing that you saw in this test that you said, like, something that was?
I think the one thing that I noticed, I've never done any wake boating, and I'd never heard of a wedge before Andy brought it up last month. It does appear that the wedge has a significant impact, and if it's used appropriately, it can reduce it. Regardless of, whatever distance we go with, I think we have to include recommendation on wedges and how they have to be used. Whether we're at 200 feet, 250 feet, whatever it is, we have to make sure that we have a regulation regarding the wedge, because the 9 inches was when the wedge was directing the wake towards the shore. That's what I got out of it.
Same thing. I think that it appears that wedge makes a pretty good difference.
So
Yes, the wedge is on all, not on all the runs. On these fast runs, these 21 mile per hour runs, there's no wedge, or no wake surfing wedge, I should say. For the wake surfing, for this really slow activity, that's whenever the wedge gets applied to presumably give you a better wedge to surf off of. I mean, better wake to surf off of.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Ask John if run number 6 and run number 8, you see, the difference, I'm looking at, you're going further down, same speed, at 150 feet, you have 9 inches, and you want to get the dam again, same speed at 200 feet, you're cutting your way down by half in that extra 50 feet. That's pretty considerable.
Right.
They're both the same direction, same run.
Yeah, significant. But if you also notice, there is a little bit of variability in this, and with more runs you can sort of tease that out. But if you notice run number 5 and 7, you've got a 2-inch variability there as well. So there is some variability at play in this data set that we just couldn't tease out with this number of runs.
Also, what's not included and would be really hard to recreate would have, if it's July 4th and you have multiple boats on the lake where you can get compounding crest, that's hard to recreate. So we didn't even try. But we also had John in the water to kind of show you, on the how it impacts an individual.
I understand that, but I think this was a really good test because you were the only boat out there. The water was fairly flat. I think the results are great. You did a great job.
Right. We had about as good of conditions as we possibly could have asked for on that particular day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions for John, either by board members or audience members or anybody?
Are there any other measurements you wish you could have taken but didn't have the time or the ability under the circumstances?
All things being equal, I really wish we didn't have this is the first time I've ever tried to do a study from video, so I didn't have a whole lot of camera confidence. So I myself was manning a camera in my hands, and then I've also got my waterproof camera that was looking at the what was going on as well. And then we had another person doing drone footage and another stationary camera. And I wish we could have had multiple points for cameras around and multiple points to have taken data from. Even if we couldn't have done it on the same side of the lake, I think it would have been great to have gotten the other side of the lake to see what was going on at the same time on the opposite side. We probably could have at least gotten a little bit of an extinction curve for energy off of something like that, but you still would need a lot more runs probably to produce a statistical number.
I think that I would have liked to have seen, in retrospect, I mean, this is the first time we've done this, runs at 200 feet, because if you compare run number 6, number 8, and number 10, Marvin pointed this out, it cut in half. Been interesting to see what the number would have done at 250. Would have gone further down? I don't know, but I think that would have been an interesting reference point. And I would have liked to have seen it at 100 feet, because we know that we've been told by people that we have people that violate the rules and get too close. We would like to have seen, I'd like to personally have seen it at 100, and we had thrown out the idea of using this as a training mechanism for people. Look, if you're at 100 feet, look at how bad it is. You have to be at the prescribed, whatever that prescribed, 250, 200, 250, whatever. In retrospect, after it was all done, and unfortunately weather's not going to cooperate. It is something that we, John and I have talked about. Come spring, do we want to recreate this, take the lessons learned, expand the study to learn more? It's an option.
And one other question, looking at Windsor and then using that to drive any decision on Loch Lomond, is there enough room, given what we see here, if we went to the 200 feet? Is there enough room for 2 boats to pass?
At 200 at 200 feet, which is the new standard, we feel like there's room on all 3 of our current lakes. If you move beyond that, I think you lose. Of course, you lose Ann first, and then you pretty soon lose Windsor as well. There was some initial talking of 300 feet. At that point, the only thing you have left is Loch Lomond.
Can I make another comment?
Absolutely.
The boat you do, that's a great little boat. It's on the light side of most surfing boats. It's a 21 foot. Most of them are 23 to 26. Also, it only has 1,500 pounds of water ballast. And I know there's a gentleman on Loch Lomond who has a Mastercraft, and it's got about double that amount of ballast. So it'd be nice if we could do another test to have a larger boat, which we do already have on the lake, and make a comparison. Because here, obviously, it's going to generate a whole lot bigger wave.
Right, and at least in some of the studies that I was examining, the ones that were not done with things like pressure transducers, the equipment that we didn't have available, they did examine some of those larger boats. They do produce a larger wake. It is a larger wake. It's not. Well, I don't want to put a number to it, but it's larger, but it's not anything crazy. You wouldn't look at it and go, wow, that is a huge step up.
John?
Yes.
If you do an expanded video, I would really like you to do it where you have some boats moored at a dock or a boathouse so you can see the movement that creates. Because your boathouse is out 20 feet essentially, and your boat's out a little 20 feet closer to that
Right.
150, 200, foot mark. So you can see what it does to rock a boat and the movement it creates.
Right.
But you were just going up against a flat.
Right. Exactly. And we kind of picked that area specifically for that reason, was we really just wanted to see, well, for one, we needed to get a wave height measurement, not wave height. I keep using that term, and you'll notice if you dig into some of these papers, they use the industry and scientific papers, they kind of use that term interchangeably. They're not necessarily interchangeable until you really get into the numbers of how you use numbers on your or buttons on your calculator that we haven't used since college physics.
When you've got a dock extended into the water and those waves come in at 9 inches,
Right.
the water comes up under, and makes a pretty, it really works on the dock.
And I think it's important that he tried to do it in a static way. It's there, but we didn't want to, like on run number 5, where you see where the shoreline curves in and you actually got more spray. There's going to be isolated situations where it's going to be worse, but it's hard to recreate that. So we just kind of did a straight shoreline, a straight boat run, because there's a lot of things. I'd rather look at the positive and say we learned something from these videos. It's really easy to go, well, how does the shoreline shallow? Does that impact it? Did we use the right kind of boat? Did we run it at the right angle? I mean, we're not, that's probably beyond our ability, and we're not full scientists. But I think this gets us closer, but I do think we need more information. We learned a lot the first time we did this. I think we need to learn a little more. I think the most significant thing I learned, which I mentioned earlier, is the wedge directionality is got to be an important thing that we have to notate in future rules. At least in my opinion. I don't want to speak for the committee.
My opinion, this is a great baseline, but in the real world, during the summer, when you got family out there, you've got young kids trying to paddleboard, or your wife's trying to kayak, and then you got multiple boats with wave action. Now, what is an appropriate distance for a wake boat or a pleasure boat?
Well, and the other thing that I would say is I would like to have us in the future, if we do another study, to do a straight water skiing boat. So we have, I have no idea, maybe a water skiing boat on some of those runs produces, is it half the height or 3/4 the height? Just a bass boat. If that's allowable, and we're talking about wake boats, what is the comparison between the two? I think that's important so we understand the full impact, because, God forbid a bass boat creates a 4-inch wake and a wake boat produces, with the wedges pointed in the right direction, produces a 4-inch wake, then what's the difference? So I think we need to learn a little bit more, in my opinion.
Well, also there's input from one of the folks who lives on Churchill Drive. They're asking to see if we could see the impact of boats such as cigarette boats, banana boats, cruisers, and jet boats. So to your thought about the ski boats.
Well,
there's
and
all
we don't want to
kinds
get
of
into the
boats out.
science business. I mean, we
There's
got to be
all-
careful not to
Yes.
go too far.
Yes, but I'm just saying, they're thinking about other boats and their impact.
Hang on, Marv. Hang on, Marv. We got somebody else asking a question. Hang on, Marvin. Marvin? Hey, Marv. Hang on. We got somebody else talking.
I noticed the direction of travel. All of your video was shot basically parallel to the shoreline. And one pass, I forget which one it was, showed an area to the south where the shoreline curves out. And when those waves, you pointed them out, when those waves hit that shoreline, there was no place for the wave to go out. It just went up.
Right.
So if you happen to be, if your dock or seawall happens to be in the not parallel to the line or perpendicular parallel to the line of travel, you're going to get bigger waves. And I don't know how you can do that, or what Tom said about the wedge and throwing the wave to the middle of the lake is probably the single biggest thing that can happen. If your seawall curves, you're going to get waves.
Right, and that particular run was run number 5, and if you get to go back and watch the video, you can kind of watch that wake, and you can imagine where that energy is getting pinched off, and just exactly like you said, it kind of explodes upward with the same wake that we saw.
And if the pass was in the other direction, the wave is in that same area when it hits, barely noticeable.
Correct.
But we're asking that our boat traffic go in a counterclockwise fashion.
And some people are going to get hit continually.
Exactly.
Make them go in a certain direction. They're going to get hit every time.
Is there an advantage to have the wake going the opposite direction, or is it just lack of knowledge?
You mean whenever the wedge is...
Instead of sending it out to the middle, is it an advantage to have
No, yeah, that's just generally lack of knowledge.
knowledge?
There's also a preference in how you
Yes, Marvin, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, I think you did a great job on the test. We're talking about wake boats. You did tests with the wake boat. Now, other boats were mentioned. You have to remember, all different boats have different hull designs. Some are designed to make waves, like wake boats. Some are designed to not make waves, like ski boats. Water ski boats are designed to make the flattest wave, the lowest wave possible, because you're trying to ski around buoys of course, and you don't want to have to go through a boat's wave. So, we don't want to compare apples and oranges. I think we need to stick with the wake boat, and, like I said, I think the test was great, and we can expand this, like Tom said, and we put a couple of different kinds of wake boats on there, and see how they react. You're going to have different wind conditions. And like the gentleman said, how the wall is shaped makes a big difference, but also how the angle to hit that way. So, but this was great because you kept the angles the same on each run. So that way you can compare the difference. That's why one wave was higher than the other wave, because when you were going one direction, it was hitting at one angle. When you go in the other direction, it was hitting at the other angle. Overall, I think it's a great test, and I agree with Tom. I think we should do it some more. We should run some more examples, different wake boats, and let's stick to wake boats because that's what we're talking about. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Marvin. Yes, sir.
Is this on?
It is.
I just had a quick observation about the splash height. At my seawall, my water depth is about 21 to 24 inches. My neighbor, his water depth is about 6 inches. He has a splash height that's easily 2 to 3 times more than mine from the same boats going by. So just an observation I made.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for John while we have him up here? Comments, questions from anyone?
Going once, going twice?
I want to say something. It seemed like that study was more for the seawall, but not necessarily like a kayaker that's 100 foot away from the area as well. I'd like to see on the next test maybe have a kayak with a depth finder or something that you can see graphically and record the wave depth up and down, and have more of a more scientific approach of measuring something that everybody can see.
That's actually a really good idea. I haven't seen it done that way. Typically, the way they measure that sort of thing is we use something called a pressure transducer. So it's just an instrument that's going to take a measurement of water pressure a couple times a second or what have you, and then it's going to graph out how much water was above at any particular type of any particular timestamp along that. So that might get close. I don't know how fast one of those units run, but as far as well, I'm sure you know, but
I can help you with that.
I know you know.
But it didn't take in consideration the safety of a kayaker or somebody out there that's wanting to enjoy the water at the same time. It's like it's either or. And, we've heard before that we should go to different lakes if we weren't in a kayak, if they're going to be wakeboarding. So I just want to see if we can take that into consideration.
Right. Definitely, we want to get that in at some point. And that was one of the first things that we were kind of talking about. We were like, this would be really good to add. Unfortunately, whenever we started stacking up the runs that we were going to have to make, what it'll end up being is a lot of runs, because we're going to need somebody that's an average kayaker, somebody that's not well-versed in kayaking, and then somebody that's really, really good at it that knows exactly what they're doing and how to take one of those wakes. So if you get any one user in a boat, then we're going to have to argue, well, is that guy very good at taking a wake?
Right, but the instrument can record that, in a real setting, in a real kayak, and show you what that effect is, regardless of their ability in the kayak. So it's more objective.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Yeah, no, I think that would be a good use of equipment that in a way we could use that particular instrument that I hadn't really thought of. Great idea.
And perhaps it could give us a better sense of the impact on little kids that are paddling around in the water next to their grandparents' dock. Because I know that's been a concern expressed by
Right.
many people.
Okay, anything else? I think John said we were going to post this video on the webpage.
Right, so we'll make this available on probably the Lakes webpage, presumably in the data section. Will that work? Okay.
Yeah, that way you can rewind the videos.
Thanks, John. Very good presentation, good information provided. So at this point, we've heard numerous, in the last 2 or 3 months, I can't tell you how many emails I've received, both pro wake boat and against wake boats, and we've heard a whole lot of data. We got a lot of feedback from a lot of residents, which is a good thing. I want to particularly thank those who have presented us not just with a problem and complained about a situation, but have come up with some practical solutions. And we have looked at a lot of different solutions and considered a lot of things, and we'll continue to do so, and hopefully make a decision sometime in December at the next meeting. At this point, is there anybody else who has a point to make that has either not already been made or present some new fact or some new piece of data? Because I think we've kind of beat this one to death to a certain degree. Does anybody have anything else they need to present? Okay. Yeah, we've distributed the material amongst all the members of the committee, and we've got all the data. So Rick, I think you had a couple of points on some potential solutions. And again, we haven't seen this video. I just saw this video today for the first time. So that's some new considerations that we have to make. But to date, I think Rick has a couple of comments he wants to make on some
and there's
things.
also some new emails that just came in the last few days. But I'd like to share with the committee some of the possible solutions that have either come from the committee or from homeowners that, and this is not all of them, but it's something that the committee, that we think we should consider. Some of them would be rule changes. One of them is incorporate the new 200-foot from shore rule based on the industry input. Another one would be require that the wake be thrown toward the center of the lake and not directed at the shoreline. I think that could happen. Is that right, John? Because your runs kind of, as a matter of fact, your runs demonstrated that where if
for
you
those that have a wedge.
Yes. Okay, let me just continue. And these are things for us to consider and that the committee will be considering. And another one is identify wake boats and all boats with water ballast at the time of registration. We'd like to know which ones they are. We'd like them to know that we have a concern. Recommend that wake boats be issued a separate sticker indicating that boat is capable of producing a wake, which we believe that visibility would give homeowners and the rangers better visibility of which ones are out there.
And what Rick's talking about here is that every boat in Bella Vista has this current sticker on it. It's registered. So any boat that potentially could have a ballast, or any boat that has a ballast that you could potentially do wakeboarding behind, we would require, and again, we have to get legal to check this out, but I think we can get away with this, hopefully, is require them to have a separate sticker. And so in the case of Bella Vista, that might only be 20 boats. I don't think we have 20 boats in Bella Vista that are ballast capable at this point, but it might be 1 through 10, and every boat capable of that activity would have a separate number on it, and hopefully would be big enough so that not only the rangers could see it, but the residents could see it. And so, in essence, we're putting the person out there wakeboarding or doing these activities, we're kind of putting them on notice and saying, hey, we're allowing you to do this at this point, but at the same time, there are people going to be watching your activity, and if you do something that's not within the guidelines, if you're not within the 200-foot rule, for example, or you're violating some other policy, this would make them easily identifiable by both rangers and residents. So that's one of the things we had kind of batted around. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, then require wakeboard boat operators to watch a video that to inform them of their potential danger. Also, we're going to mention signage, and the other thing about rules is that at point of registration that they receive a color map depicting where wake boats may operate under the rule 200-foot rule. I want to speak to buoys for a minute because one of the things that's come up repeatedly, because from the audience, we've heard from homeowners, we've heard things that are not necessarily directly related to wake boats. And we've also heard, John and Rick, we know there has to be a balance between practical buoy usage and because we can't just bring the lake with them. But consider placing a 200-foot marker buoy, assuming we do a 200-foot rule, off ramps at ski lakes to demonstrate distance required for wake boats. And modify existing buoys to better depict what is required: no wake, no ski, danger. So better depict them, and to consider a large color panel or larger words on the buoy. And some of that comes from the gentleman that was talking about Tyree Raceway. And if you go, so my experience is on Loman. You have to get real close to the buoy. Like, so if you're on Loman, on the west shoreline, the northwest shoreline, running southbound towards Tyree, there are a lot of buoys. And the no-wake coves have a series of them. So if you're running southbound on the starboard side, we'll say, towards Tyree, you'll come to a point where one of them is no ski, so you're not supposed to go beyond that. It'd be the Stony Kirk Cove. And then about 150 feet, 200 feet, some number of, is a no wake. But it's hard to read them. So I thought that was a good suggestion. Can we do something different to make the buoys that might be simple, whether it be a large color depiction on it or something to change between danger, no ski, no wake, because you can actually stay on plane into Tyree quite a ways, but you cannot pull a tuber or a ski or a, so it's obvious that because the guy on Tyree Raceway talks about tubers coming down there, which is another issue. Do tubers know that they're considered that they're, that they have to remain in the ski area?
No ski mean just no skiing or no skiing and no tubing
and the other thing we talked about is or someone brought up was that have color maps, have a color-coded map of every lake posted at the ramp, and maybe even sent out to all the residents who have a boat that's registered, and the color-coded map would indicate, if I'm in Tyree, this is the area that, you could have green areas where you could do all activities, and then you could have different colors of red or something else that would depict, hey, this is an area that's no ski, this is an area that's no wake. Maybe red would be no wake, maybe some other color would be no ski, and then maybe green would be all activities or something like that. And if you sent that out with the, when you got your registration, and again, you'd have to do it on 3 different lakes because we currently have 3 lakes.
And then also post that at the ramps and at the marina.
Right.
And also hand it out to the people that rent the pontoon boats.
Yep. Because if you're new, if you came here from, like I did 20 years or 17 years ago, I was in Loch Lomond the first time, and I was in Stony Kirk, and I didn't realize that was a no-rake zone. And somebody yelled at me, and finally I realized, it's like, okay, got it. Now that, now that I know that, but just to let people know, if you're the first time user on the lake, you can see this map and quickly see. Again, we're not going to catch everybody, but I think it would help directionally let a lot of people know this is what you can do, this is what you can't do in certain areas of the lake. Yes, sir.
On Stony Kirk, you've got 3 no-wake buoys. And I have been guilty of this until I saw the others. I passed the first no-wake, and I put the hammer down. And because I was out of the no-wake zone. And I think anybody else with common sense would assume that when you went by the no-wake zone thing, you were out.
Yeah.
Right. And so these maps would help, the color-coordinated maps would help. Again, it's not going to catch everybody, but it would help us with enforcement, and it would help people understand, here's the lake I'm on, this is what I can do, this is the area I can do it, and this is the area I can't. Because I think a lot of people misinterpret those rules.
Lastly, enforcement. Rangers are the key to the improved compliance with rules that will reduce incidents of large wakes jeopardizing safety. And we believe that the rangers give us the opportunity to increase awareness. We want to make sure the rangers all know about, we talked earlier about making the wake boats have a different sticker. We want to make sure that all rangers know all the rules and will enforce those. So we're looking for a highly educated and rangers that know what to do. That is it. That kind of summarizes the things that we've heard. What's not on here is prohibiting wake boats entirely. So that's kind of where our discussion has been. I know we want to think about that, and I know it's our intention to make a recommendation in December.
That is correct.
Any questions about what's
Carol?
on here?
On the pontoon rentals, if you did a picture of that and just laminate it and paste it to the boat, then we wouldn't have to worry about, oh, I'm going to get this water.
Right. Yeah, and I envision someone, when you go to rent a pontoon, the person renting you the pontoon, when they hand you the keys to the boat, say, hey, just this is the map of the lake. Be aware there are no wake zones within the lake. There are no ski zones and things like that. Just make them aware of it. Because I think a lot of the violators.
I think it has to be simple, because I've rented their boats before, and the guy at the marina, he's under a lot of pressure. If there's two of them, they're both under a lot of pressure to get your keys, get your money, get your contract, get you going. So someone even suggested depicting the map or the rules, posting them or putting a sticker on the boat, the rental boats themselves.
Yeah, that's what he just said. That's a great idea.
If I can add to that, with the maps, what if we had the waypoints on electronics that we can share with people who have electronics, and they can see the boundaries, and just put that out there to everybody?
Can't hurt. Right. Can't hurt. That way you could see it on your.
Yeah, however you want to see it. You want to see it by paper or on your electronics. It's right there.
Great idea. We'll add that to the list.
And I think the way our rules read, a gentleman over here was talking about a 16. I think docks can only be 16 feet at most out into the water. 16 feet at most. And so I think our rules state that if whatever the rule is, well, it's currently 150 feet for wake boats. I think they have to include, that distance includes that object. It's not the shoreline. It's 150 feet from any. Yeah.
So in essence, you can say we need to add 15, 18 feet to whatever that is.
Well, I mean, my only point is the operator's obligated to stay 100 today. A wake boat needs to be 150 feet from any object on the lake shore. Oh, okay, I see. You mean for map depiction?
Yes.
Right.
No, but if we're going to make a map that's, the rule is 200 feet, that's what, about 5% or 4% of. So we might as well make it accurate.
Rick, that's exactly right. I think it's 18 feet. And
yes,
the gentleman raised the question I was going to raise, and that is, why don't we take a wave measurement at the edge of the dock, right? And that's a nice data point to have.
Hey, there's one other thing, too, that came up a couple years ago. How high are docks allowed to be? And I've reviewed the rules, and I contacted the city guy that's in charge of code. We couldn't come to an agreement, but part of the height of docks is based on normal pool, which is defined in the codes by mean sea or by sea level or by elevation above sea level. And most of the dock builders are building, I think it's 12 inches. Is anybody? Is it
at least 12 inches above?
And the way it comes about is usually the materials. You can only have cedar or redwood, I believe, in contact with the water. And a lot of times artificial products are used above 12 inches. So they can have redwood touching the water, but they can't have treated yellow pine, as an example, or synthetics in contact with the water. So the practical result of that is docks can be height above 12 inches, but if they use artificial, or treated yellow pine or synthetics, they're going to be 12 inches above the water. Because if you'll recall, a couple years ago we were talking about, well, what if a person's dock's only 6 inches above the water? They're going to be overwashed by a lot of waves. So it becomes a safety issue for the dock owner. So I wanted to just share that with you as well.
Okay.
I love my floating dock.
I do too. Yes, sir.
I'll just ask one question. I was very appreciative of what you've done, and John, I really great film. But with you making recommendations that we voted on in December, and at the same time you're talking about doing an expanded video, and the weather's not going to prevent you doing one until spring probably. So if you come to some agreement and you make some decisions and you vote on them in December, come next spring, if you have additional information that possibly change those recommendations, I assume you will do so.
We can change by year, but we can't, to my understanding, it would be impractical to make a change mid-year because all the information is sent out at the beginning of the year, people register boats and what have you. So if we make a recommendation in December, that'll go into effect in 2020. And then hopefully we'll do that other test next year, get some additional information, and then hopefully make adjustments for the 2021 year. But my understanding is it would be more difficult and expensive to do a change mid-year.
It can be done. I mean, it would just require us to mail out to everybody. It can be done. I don't want to, it'd be best to have the regulations in for an entire year, but if the committee really feels that it's important to make an adjustment, we can make it happen.
Okay. Good to know.
But I think it is clear from these tests that have been done that moving it out to 200 feet is an improvement over 150 feet.
Absolutely.
I don't think, is there anyone who's not clear on that?
I don't think so. I think that's the industry standard. I would think that the board, I haven't talked to everyone, but I would think that the committee at least would come to an agreement that 200 feet would be a good recommendation.
I mean, because really that's the basis for the training and informing the public and all the maps and everything else. You need to be on that 200.
And if we do identify these people at registration and there's 10 or 20 of them, then it would be easy to find them.
Yeah, again, we're only talking probably about, I don't know what the estimate is, but I would say we were probably 10 or less boats in the entire register today, as of today. So.
Before we leave this thing we just talked about, are there any committee members that have an input or recommendation to change this or strike something, add something?
I like the note about, we're not talking about a distance from the shoreline. Kind of goes back to that original discussion we had about the rules and respect, right? And that is, we're talking about the distance from harming somebody or some other person on anything, anywhere, right? That's a key component of this, is there are rules. These aren't the only rules. That distance isn't the only thing.
Right. And I think it comes down to, we all live in this community, we all like to do different activities, and you mentioned kayaks a while ago. If you're going to be out in a kayak and you don't want to be bothered by waves, you have options where you can go other lakes. And if people are out there skiing and wakeboarding at Loch Lomond on Saturday on July 4th weekend, and you want to go out in a kayak, it might not be the best time to go out in a kayak during that time of day. So I mean, some of this is common sense, courtesy, and just trying to get along with everybody, realizing that everybody likes to do their own activities, and we have to accommodate each other. So.
Well, most of the lakes have no wake zones or no skiing zones that people that want to go there. So there's kayak.
Right.
If there's a lot of them.
If there's a lot of activity on the lake, correct? Yes, sir.
Is when we have heavy rain forecasts 2 and 3 days ahead of time, 2+ inches, and we have a lot of water shedded for Loch Lomond. It doesn't take long at all to fill it up. Is there a mechanism that we can put in place to prepare for that onslaught of water so that our docks and seawalls, what have you, are not getting flooded? Because that's bad enough, but you got to have those side seers. After a little bit of drawdown, they still come by, the Lake Patrol being one of them, which creates unwanted, unnecessary wave action onto your docks, but mainly your docks underwater, so now it's getting into all your accessories there. So what I'm asking is, can we not pre-lower the lake down anticipation, and why not?
So the most that we can lower Loch Lomond safely is 3 inches per 24 hours. And the challenge is that, you know, and even the weathermen will say they're not very good predictors, and it's rarely that are they 100% do you know. So my concern would be is if we're constantly trying to lower the lake ahead of a storm that may or may not hit us, it's going to be hard to adjust. You know, as I mentioned, I referenced earlier, I live on Loch Lomond during the flooding that we just recently had at noon. My shoes were getting wet on my dock, and by 3, my kneecaps were getting wet. And so no advance lowering would have probably helped much at all. There was a tremendous amount of water that came in. So I would just be cognizant that, and Jim Abrahamson was here at one of our previous meetings a couple months ago and referenced that these lakes were designed for recreation. They were not designed for flood control.
Well, I just disagree with you. Corps of Engineers lets out water in the holding dams up there in anticipation. When they say we're going to get 4, 5, 6 inches of rain, which is what we had the worst storm this summer, I don't know why we're sitting there, bring it on. We're going to hold it, let everything flood. We'll let the natural overflow lower it.
So
go ahead and pre-draw it down.
So then there's also the other side when 2, 3, 4 inches of rain is forecasted, and in order for us to be able to make any headway at all, we're going to have to make these adjustments more like a week ahead. The forecast for 2 or 3 days ahead might be pretty accurate, but the forecast for 5 to 7 days, there's no way that's even close to accurate.
All you can do is lower it 3 or 4 inches.
3 or 4 inches safely because because of the impacts downstream, and also because when you bring the water down that quickly, you make the shoreline unstable when you bring it down that fast. So you're going to be causing damages there too, simply by bringing it down. And then what happens when now you've brought it down a foot or 2 feet, and then you don't get the rain, and then you're in a dry period, and the lake doesn't fill up for 6 months, which that's happened. We've been through those periods as well. It might be hard to remember, but there have been times where we have had no water going over the spillway at Loch Lomond.
And keep in mind, this year, I'm not a meteorologist, but I do read the paper every day, and according to the paper that I've been reading, Northwest Arkansas, we were right at 20 inches above normal on a 45-inch base. So that is a lot of rain, 20 inches above normal for the year. So we've had a very, very wet, unexpected year. Yes, ma'am. Hang on, Marv. Somebody else is talking.
Do you want comments now about the Waco or during the open forum?
I was assuming this was the open forum, so go ahead. If you have a comment now, go ahead.
Okay, well, I was just really eager to comment.
One second, Marvin. Hi, I'm Charlie Teal. I live at 95 Mayfair Drive. We're on the west side of Lake Windsor. First of all, thank you all for your service on the Lakes Advisory Committee. I was a member of the Recreation Joint Advisory Committee in 2010 and 2011. Was elected the POA board in 2012 and served on the board till 2015. I know from personal experience how challenging it is to deal with difficult issues. So thank you for taking on this challenge. I think we can all agree that the Bella Vista POA lakes are restricted to access, and the use of our lakes is subject to policies adopted by the POA, such as no wake on several of the smaller POA lakes. In considering changes to policies regarding wake boats on POA lakes, there are a number of matters for the committee to consider, including damage to dock and seawalls from wake boat, recommended setback distances for shoreline docks and other boats and watercraft, safety concerns for swimmers and kayakers, and an appropriate definition of wake boats. It is my understanding this committee has been provided with information from POA members regarding each of these matters. I would propose that the committee consider a temporary moratorium on the registration of any additional wake boats for operation on POA lakes, pending a final recommendation from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is that even legal?
I'd have to check with Doug, but he said grandfathering in, which is a little bit different than a temporary moratorium, but he said grandfathering in was not legal. The rules that you apply have to be applied uniformly. I'd have to ask him about a temporary moratorium because that may be different, but from my non-legal sense, it seems similar.
You know,
Doug's our general counsel.
We need to, that recommendation as well as some of the other things that we've shared or talked about or come from others need to be run by him anyway. So I think the committee ought to take that on to make contact with him about that consideration and our other recommendations as well.
And I can make sure that Doug is at the next meeting.
Okay.
And we probably ought to do that before December, so Tom will follow up with or make contact with him.
We can run up.
You know, originally you developed a proposed rule, so I think we should look at it as well as the other things that we've advocated to make sure that they're feasible, that he thinks they're feasible.
Yeah, I think that what Doug has already put together would address item number 4 on Charlie Teal's list, the determining an appropriate definition of wake boat. I think he's done that. He found some regulations from another community, and it described the action of taking on ballast as opposed to trying. I'm doing it a disservice, but I think what he's put together really accomplished. So I think we've accomplished that already.
The other thing is, it's easy for us to make recommendations, Rick, for what your department needs to do. So we've heard you about buoys, but we think that there's some room for improvement with buoys, whether that be small ones to depict the 200 feet or better, or take the existing buoys but give better signage to them, whether it's color or what.
And I think one thing that we've learned too is that from an enforcement perspective, it's hard to be able to judge someone else's distance from shoreline, much less your own.
Yeah.
So some sort of a way to self-check how far you are off of shoreline, I think, is a good idea.
Okay. Also, I referenced earlier about the budget. In the past budget, we have additional ranger staff. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that would, having additional coverage will also be helpful.
Definitely.
I think a lot of it too this can improve if there's proactive education of people who are on the water that the rangers can provide to help them understand why these rules are in place. And so to your point earlier, if we do a better job of bringing all the rangers up to speed on this issue, that can be very helpful in the long term.
The rangers became up to speed on the previous rule of 150 feet pretty quickly, and they have been in contact. I believe they have been in contact with every registered wake boat multiple times and have spoken to them. Have you been spoken to when you were out on the water by rangers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not operating one of these boats, but yes.
Okay. So they kind of stick out like sore thumbs, and we make at a point to talk to them.
Okay. Andy?
I just wanted to make one, I don't know if you could consider, well, I guess 2 points. Maybe the buoys that you're talking about at 200 feet, maybe you put them at 150 so people know, because when you water ski or whatever, you have a distance that you swing out or two beside the boat. And with that also, if members could purchase one, just like we can buy our own street lights from the electric company if we want one, that if you feel like you need to keep people out of your shoreline, that you could pay, I don't know what a buoy costs, $200, and you guys will go place it to solve the buoy issue, and you could put it at 150 feet to help people find it, because you're right, it's really hard to tell how far you are from the shore. Even if you're trying to follow the rules, you may be breaking them. The second point is with the possible proposals, I don't think it's unheard of to have require people to go sit and have an education about operating a boat. Like Grace said about making sure education is key, maybe they're required to go attend a 30-minute class that you guys offer when you register the boats to get their registration. And that's when you get your tag for the boat to say that you're a certified operator of the boat. So that way you can explain wedges and that kind of stuff to them and make sure they hear it, and there's some kind of something that goes with it. So it's not just somebody's wife goes and gets it or whatever, and then they don't even care about it or don't know about it. So that was just my thoughts.
Good comments, thanks. Yes, sir.
I'm Steve Curtis, and I've talked to Rick about this a couple of times, but I noticed on the budget wish list, we did not have a fish cleaning station for any place on Lowman. We have one fish cleaning station, and that's up at the dock, and you can't park your boat there.
Where's the fish cleaning station currently?
It's at the new dock.
Oh, the dock, floating dock.
At the new floating dock up yeah, that's the only one on it. And they have been after us. I belong to the Fly Tires, and they've been after us for years to take out the smaller fish. We're willing to do it, but it's really hard if you don't have a cleaning station anywhere.
Okay.
Just, so could I maybe get it back on the wish list?
Maybe we could have the Fly Tires help us buy one of those and put it on Loch Lomond.
It looked like it was about $2,500 is what was my guess.
Okay,
and
we can add it to the wish list for sure.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't realize there was only one on Loch Lomond.
Yeah.
Anybody else? The audience, anywhere else? Comments, questions, concerns?
One last thing.
Go ahead.
We have a volunteer who wants to go to the board meeting this month and give a report, and I think that'll be on the 21st, is that correct?
Okay.
Next Thursday night, anybody wants to do that?
I don't know. He's ill right now. I'm not sure if he can go or not. we can discuss that offline.
I'm gone. Is anybody else, can anybody else? It's in the, what time?
6 p.m. it's here.
6 p.m. here, 21st. All you gotta do is convey what we're talking about. I'll have to turn to Paul and
I think Paul said he would go, but I haven't talked to him, and he's not feeling well today, so we can discuss
Marvin,
that
are
later.
you still on? Can you brief the board on the 21st of November?
I need to check my calendar, but I think I've got something on the 21st.
It'd be that evening, 6 p.m. So if you'd follow up with Matt, either you or Paul hopefully can do that.
Okay, with that,
Next meeting here will be December 11th.
December 11th is the next meeting. Thanks for all who attended, and meeting adjourned.